the age of 28, I found myself without a purpose. I was hopeless and suicidal, and I attempted to take the lives of 2 other people. I grew up the youngest of 11 kids, 7 boys and 4 girls in the family. And I was taught that we grew up in a good home, and a good home meant a roof over our heads, a bed to sleep in, and food on the table. There was a little bit more that I desired, and one of those things that I desired was seeking the love of my father. My dad never told me that he loved me. There was occasions that love was shown to me, and one of those that really sticks out very much to me was I was sitting on a couch and my dad was in his chair, and he looked over at me and he said, "Boy, come here." And I walked over to him and I was scared because I thought I'd done something wrong. And my father picked me up and he sat me on his lap and he laid my head on his shoulder and he rocked me in his chair. And I remember that moment and how his body smelled. We weren't to talk outside of the walls of the home, and it was private, and we didn't talk outside of closed doors, and that had an effect on me to the point where I wasn't able to share my feelings and my thoughts. And at a young age, I was molested as a child, and I internalized that, and I didn't talk to anybody about that. I never told anyone. At the age of 13, I was invited to go to a church to hear an evangelist speak. And after the sermon was over, they had an altar call. And there was people that went forward, and my sister turned to me and said, "Don't you feel the need to go forward?" And I said, "No." And then my brother-in-law said, "You sure you don't want to go forward?" And I'm like, "No." And then a couple of neighbors said to me, "It's okay if you want to go forward." And so I thought the thing to do is to go forward. So I did. And when I went forward, I met a gentleman that I didn't know, and he took me into a back room and he asked me to bow my head and to repeat after him, and I did. And I mouthed words. And after we were finished, he stood up and he said, "Congratulations, you're saved." So I thought I was saved, because when you don't know that you don't know, you don't know. I took my first drink at the age of 19, and I can tell you that I was alcoholic from the time I took my first drink, because it gave me a false self-confidence and made me feel good. I was planning a wedding with my future wife, and my dad had leukemia, and we were watching him one day in my parents' home, and my wife and I were arguing and fighting in the other room over something about the wedding, and I don't even recall what it was, but from faintly in the other room I could hear my father saying, Don't fight, please, don't fight." And it was shortly after that that my future wife left, and I went to my father's bedside, and I made a promise to my father that I would never end up in a divorce. In all essence, what I was saying was, I can control anything and anyone around me. As my alcohol use progressed, I found my activities evolved around alcohol. Whether it was a dart league, bowling league, golf league, softball, you name it, I did it, and it all evolved around alcohol. I got married in 1983, and just a little more than 3 years after the marriage, I find myself going through a divorce. Going through my divorce was hard, and my drinking increased. About a year into my divorce, I met a lady by the name of Sue. She was very special to me. She recognized that I had a drinking problem, and she tried to talk to me about it, but I continued drinking. As I continued to drink, I fell into a deep depression, and I started having suicidal ideations. Playing ball is what kept me alive. It kept me alive because I got recognition for something that I enjoyed doing and I was very good at. We ended up winning the Pennsylvania state title, and I was excited. State champs. I called Sue on the way home, and I was all excited, sharing with her that we were state champs, and she wasn't excited. She'd asked me to come over and speak to her later in the week and asked me to please not drink before I came, and I agreed. So I went over to Sue's later in the week, and she sat me down. And she looked at me and she said, "What I'm about to say is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But it's because I love you, not because I don't love you, that I'm even willing to put myself through this." And she stated that she couldn't see me anymore until I made a decision to get help for my alcoholism. I felt that I'd lost the best thing that ever happened to me. I went on a 5-day drinking binge. The suicidal thoughts became clearer. I developed a plan. I blamed others for my pain and my suffering. I made a plan to kill my ex-wife and another man, and then commit suicide myself. After 5 days of drinking, I'd had enough. I called my mother and 9 siblings on the telephone with a lot of crying and emotion and said simply, "I love you and thank you, goodbye," and I hung the phone up. So I was parked along the road and I was waiting for my ex-wife to travel that road on the way to work, and I flagged her down. I had a gun. It was in my waistband, and I had a jacket on and shorts. And I just couldn't wait to see the expression on her face when I pointed that gun at her. So whenever she stopped and I got out, I ran up the road toward the car. And as I ran toward the car, the gun slid through my waistband, and I was trying to keep it from falling out, and I couldn't. It was falling, and she knew something was wrong. She took off, and when she took off, I pulled the gun out and I fired 2 shots. And I was told that I hit the car in the back, 1.5 inches from the gas tank. At this point, I knew I was in trouble. I was scared. I'd failed again. I couldn't believe it. I got in my vehicle and I went home to my mother's house to seek money. As I arrived at my mother's house, my brother and my sister and my brother's wife, my mother, were on the porch, and I was in a frantic state of mind, and I just didn't know. I just needed to get away, and I run up on the porch and I just said to Mom, "Mom, give me money, give me money, give me money now, I need money, give me!" I didn't know what was going on. I was scared. And my brother grabbed a hold of me and he shook me. And he shook me and he asked me where the gun was, and he looked down and he seen the gun in my waistband, and we started to wrestle over the gun. And in the midst of all that, there was a voice that came over that I heard, and it was, "Let go. It's going to be okay." And I let go. So I spent 8 days in mental health treatment, and I can tell you that those 8 days were better than a lot of days in the past. That it helped me to become sober. It helped me to get some medication and level the playing field and get an understanding about why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and why I was making some of the choices that I was making, and why I was drinking, and some of the pain that I was experiencing. I was told that at the time I committed my crime that my alcohol content was 0.37, and you should be comatose at 0.30. Shows how much of an immunity I built up in my system. I realized that I had an undiagnosed mental illness that I was using the alcohol to self-medicate with. And these were helpful to me to help me to move forward, even though I had many challenges to deal with coming out of mental health. Whenever I ended up wanting to take the lives of 2 other people and to commit suicide myself, it fell back on some things that had happened previously in my life, and that is that at the age of 13 that I was told that I was saved, and I wasn't. And I believed that in my mind, and Satan used that. I made a promise to my father on his deathbed that I would never end up in a divorce. I wanted to honor my father. I was still seeking his approval, so Satan used that. And then I went on to the wedding vows that I took with my ex-wife, and till death do you part, and Satan used that. Till death do you part. All these things had me so mixed up, and you compound that with the alcoholism. I was confused. I was lost. So I was waiting for my trial to come up. For 11 months I was not drinking because I was scared and I didn't want my bond revoked. I was miserable. I was a no-good dry drunk. I couldn't wait till all this was over and that I could go back to being a sociable drinker. My trial came up. I was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison. I went to prison and I was scared. I had nowhere else to turn now. I had no one else to enable my alcoholism or my desire for. In that 5x10 cell, I was reading an AA handbook that someone had loaned to me. So I was reading the book and I started getting a little paranoid because this was about me. Somebody was following me. And I had what they call a spiritual awakening. And I turned my will and my life over to God. I received the salvation of Jesus into my heart. It was wonderful. It was like nothing else that I'd ever experienced before. I was so excited. I had peace. I had serenity. I had salvation. And when you know that you know, you know. And at that time I knew, because I knew that everything was going to be okay from that point. And I knew that I was called upon to share this testimony with you, to glorify God. Because on that night that I made that commitment, I had been delivered and still am from any and all desire to ever drink again. I didn't have the torment anymore. I didn't have the pain, the cravings. I had Jesus. Here I am 21 years later, sitting here and telling you about those very personal things that when I was a child that we weren't to talk about. But I believe it needs to be told. It needs to be shared, what God can do for one in their life if they allow Him in. I am very blessed today. I have a lovely wife that I've been married to for 19 years that has stood beside me. I have a beautiful 15-year-old daughter. These are things that I cherish today and I would not have experienced in my life had I succeeded in suicide. I didn't know at that time, but I know now. And I know that I don't have to go and run to alcohol when challenges arise. I don't need to run to the bar to look for answers. Today I go to prayer and I look to God for the answers. And as I am a blessed individual, I say to you, tell your kids that you love them. And I asked you, do you know that you know?